Hey everybody, it's Blobby back again. I hope you've all been doing well. I know I've been gone for 2 weeks at this point, but I have a good reason this time rather than normally me just being lazy. After that last video I had uploaded, I actually had a lot of motivation to continue working on videos, but only a few days after I'd uploaded it, I started to fall ill. And then eventually, just feeling slightly bad, ended up into something much worse. And then I took a test for COVID, and I proved to be positive, which makes video uploading not my highest priority, as well as the fact that I basically couldn't because I felt so horrible. Thankfully now, the symptoms are lightening up, so I'm ready to work again. But for now, let's just get right into this no sleep story. The homeless man in my neighborhood didn't just want change. 2 years ago, my wife Angie and I decided it was finally time to buy a house. We knew it was anything but a buyer's market, but we were sick of paying triple what a mortgage would be in rent every month. I'm sure this story is familiar to some of you, and we went through every stage of disbelief, anger, and finally apathy after every competitive offer we put together was blown out of the water by an international investment corporation. I'm not mad about the process anymore, though it left me questioning where society was headed. How is this legal? I went to school, I paid off debt, I got a good job, I did everything right just to get priced out of the city I grew up in. Perhaps some anger remains, but after finally setting our sights on the city's less than desirable neighborhoods, we got our home. On June 1st, we moved into a 4,500 square foot colonial. It had hardwood floors that patinated like leather, and the frosted plaster trim gave the ceilings the look of a wedding cake. The basement was a different story though. It wasn't just unfinished, it was a dank hole in the ground, and scribbles on the walls were in strange spirals or crude faces. Kids. The realtor had said like she knew who drew the drawings. Fixing up the basement would be quite the value builder. So sure. The kitchen had composite counters, and the basement needed a sign above the entrance that read, "Abandon all hope ye who enter here." But we had a home, and a damn big one at that. The catch was that it was a stone's throw from the freeway, and that the area was known for its crime more than anything else. Angie said it was just a stepping stone. We'd bank a year's worth of mortgage, hope the housing market keeps rocketing, and move again in a year. There were some flaws in her plan. Mainly money, but I didn't say anything. I figured that we'd both just adjust to liking it there. First few weeks went smoothly, and me and my wife got to unpacking and introducing ourselves to the neighbors. Maybe it was the threat of crime and that there was some comfort and purpose knowing who you lived next to. But whatever it was, our neighbors were incredibly friendly. We felt at home quick, and while there were some shocks, we made games out of them to take the fear away. With the pops that permeated the night, we had the game where we guessed whether the sound was fireworks or gunshots. When we passed large turds, one of us would point at it and we played human or dog. Unfortunately, after just a couple of weeks at this game, we became experts at differentiating between these. Gunshots carry the sharp crack of the sound barrier being broken, while fireworks go boom or pop. And as for the poop, let's just say we hadn't seen any dogs large enough to lay landmines around town. There's a homeless problem there for sure, but they minded their own business. Our neighbors seemed to see right through them. They'd act as if they were ghosts, like they weren't even there. Hell, everyone did. I'd smile and say hello in passing. The least I could do was just treat them like normal human beings. One night after a movie, I was at the sink washing the popcorn bowl. The window above looks out to our backyard, which was heavily wooded for a city lot. When it was dark out, I could only see a sliver of what was outside beyond the reflection of myself in the glass. I frowned at the shadow of a large, tall stump. I don't remember a tree there. I swayed on my feet to see past my reflection, and in the bushes nearly out of sight, a man was just standing still, staring back at me. My heart leaped and I dropped the bowl where it crashed into the sink. "You okay in there, honey?" Angie shouted from the living room. "Yeah." I kept my eyes on the man and said nothing to Angie, not wanting to alarm her. "I'm gonna take the trash out." "Okay." I walked by the trash without touching it and opened the back door. "Hello?" Outside, the wind was blowing hard, and the branches of the buckthorn the man stood behind were waving wildly as if to warn me. "What do you want?" I stepped forward to try and show I wasn't scared, but it was the tepid step of prey, like I was better planning my weight to run. The man said nothing. I took another step forward, more confidently this time, but jumped when my movement activated the motion light. I composed myself and yelled, "This is private property. If you don't leave, I'm gonna call the police." Now, this was the emptiest of threats, and everybody in the neighborhood knew it. Cops made a point to show up an hour late, if at all. Man walked forward a few paces to where I could see him better. He was very tall and wore a heavy wool overcoat that stretched all the way down to his ankles. He continued to walk towards me. My brain was shouting, but I froze in fear. "What do you want?" He stopped just in front of me. A white scar starred across his black skin just below the chin. He was at least 6'6", but the coat that ran the entire length of his body made him gigantic. His face was just recently shaven and gaunt. He held out a fist at arm's length where he uncurled his fingers. Cupped in his enormous palm was a pill. "I don't have any drugs," I said. His face didn't change any. There was no want or question in his eyes. "Do you want me to take it?" I pointed at his hand, but his expression was static. I reached out and gently plucked the pill from inside his palm. I held it between my forefinger and thumb. It was just a pill capsule. Whatever was inside had been emptied. "What do you want?" I asked again. He opened his mouth, revealing the severed stump of a tongue, and then he widened the enormous whites of his eyes. He began to mouth something, but being tongueless, I couldn't tell what. But my blood had cooled because I felt certain it was some kind of curse. "Please, please leave." He turned and stepped into the night, and I watched the bushes sway in his wake as if a giant had been parting his way through the woods. The next day was Saturday, and I was determined to find out if anyone had known about this tall man. I walked to the strip mall and asked some of the homeless in the area, but as soon as I began to describe him, they all looked at the ground and shook their heads. The pattern was repeated with every other homeless person I tried to talk to. On my way home, I stopped by two men working on a car at the end of their driveway. "Hey," I started over to them. "This may sound a little crazy, but do you know of a tall fella around here that just wears a giant coat?" They both started laughing. "Sorry I wasted your time." I turned to go, and one of them waved me back. "Talking about a really big motherfucker?" The man raised his hand to signify. "Yay high, black coat, nasty scars?" "Yeah," I nodded. "Let's tall Frank. What do you want about him? You see him in your recycling?" "No. Why?" "Tall Frank's a can man. He makes his living that way." I nodded. "He was just acting strange in my backyard last night." "Weird how? Was he just looking like his weird self?" "No, he was staring at me from outside, and when I went out to say something, he tried to talk back to me, or at least mouth something." Both of them raised their eyebrows. "You saying tall Frank tried to communicate with you?" "Yeah." We both looked at each other. Tall Frank talks to nobody, and by talks I mean communicating in any way. "He cut his own throat to never talk again," the other had chimed in. "That's just a rumor. Tall Frank showed up in this neighborhood 20 years ago, and no one knows where he came from, and the man himself can't tell you. People put all these type of legends to the scars. Some say it was a dog that bit him, but I've never seen no dog that'll slice your tongue out. If he doesn't communicate with anyone, how come he has the name Tall Frank?" "Well, that's what my mama would call him. She used to tell me to watch my tongue or Tall Frank will take it." He chuckled to himself. "What do you think he wanted with me?" They both shrugged. "No clue, but be sure to tell us when you find out." They went back to their work, and I thanked them, and went on far less assured than I was when I had first set out. The next several days there was no sign of Tall Frank, but I began to fall ill. It was a headache at first, but soon I had heart palpitations and body aches that I almost let take me to the emergency room. I assured myself that there was no such thing as curses. Why was I letting one strange encounter with a homeless man dominate my every thought? Angie was working late lately, so I had the house to myself at night. I would stand at the kitchen window and stare into the backyard. I was obsessed, and it wasn't long before I saw him again. I was wrapped in a blanket filling the teapot at the sink when I saw him standing in the same place as before. I dropped the pot and ran to the back door. "Hey!" My head felt light, and I was in that same kind of drunken state where your fear hardly speaks to you. I scampered through the backyard over to him. "What do you want with me?" Tall Frank was staring at me. He gestured with his scarred neck for me to follow. I looked down at my bare feet, but he was already walking. "Hey, just leave us alone." I stepped cautiously after him, and when I got past the bushes where I could see the alley, I saw him standing near the trash cans. I ran after him. I don't ever want to see you back here again." With our difference in size, the blanket around my shoulders, I'm sure I looked like some angry hobbit to him. He certainly didn't act intimidated, and I couldn't blame him. Tall Frank crossed the alley and sat on a crumbling retaining wall. He gently tapped the stone next to him for me to sit. "I'm not fucking sitting." He reached into his breast pocket and paused before pulling out an envelope, putting the letter in his other hand and then reaching in and out and pulling out another. He handed the envelopes to me. His long arm nearly stretched the entire alley. I approached the letters cautiously, snatching them and stepping back. "What are these?" I muttered, already distracted. They'd both been open, and I took the papers out of one of the envelopes. It was a handwritten letter on college-ruled paper. All the ink was smeared like it had been dunked in water, but I could still read it, albeit slowly. When I was done, I let my arm fall to my side and looked at Tall Frank in disbelief. Angie had a lover. I looked at the other envelope and hardly had to read it to figure it out. The letter had read, "Atlantic Life Insurance. A policy open in my name for $250,000. Stumbled over the retaining wall and sat. The pills. I thought about the capsule that he had shown me and I tossed aside. It was my emergency albatrol. It had to be. A quick MD search showed that an overdose started with headaches and heart palpitation. And she's trying to kill me? Suddenly I realized Tall Frank was around me and he was patting my shoulder paternally. We sat in silence for a long time. "Things you can learn from people's recycling," I said. Tall Frank nodded and we watched the upstairs light turn on and my wife appeared in the window. She twisted something into her fingers and tapped it into a mug. A minute later, the back door opened. "Honey, you out there? I made you some tea," she called. I guess the homeless around her don't always want change. Sometimes they might want to save your life.